Okay. Let's see. What have we seen about the South so far? About the southern states or southern colonies? Anything that we've learned peculiar to the South in this class? Coming out of the 17th and 18th centuries? Yes. Javier, right? Yes. Their economy is based on plantations. So big commercialized operations, growing staple crops for export and using slave labor, right? Especially Virginia tobacco, South Carolina rice, okay? Slave or plantation-based economy. Anything else that we've learned? Well, for one thing, we've seen how these plantation systems developed, especially in Virginia. We focused a lot on that early on, formation of slave societies in the Southeast. Anything else you guys have learned about the South, in southern states, maybe during the era of the Revolution? Yes? Wait, what about manufacturers? Okay, yeoman, right? Yeoman. Yep. Yeoman, yeoman, okay. I understand it's not a word that we use very much. Yeoman farmers. There were a lot of Southerners who were yeoman farmers, okay? Most of them I've talked about yeoman farmers, I've been talking about the North. There's a lot of Southerners who are yeoman farmers, though, too. Just farmers who use their own family labor to farm relatively small plots of land for their own subsistence, right? We'll come back and look at some of those yeomen because a lot of them are going to get displaced with the rise of the cotton agriculture. But they're not really invested in manufacturing, right? And so they tend to oppose what particular policy promotes manufacturing. Protective tariffs, okay? So we've seen the nullification thing, that's a Southern thing, anti-tariff movement. And we've also seen the South, and I'll just put it in here for you, the South, the Southern states kind of, in terms of this whole independence thing, they really like independence as long as it's just the right people, right? They don't want it to extend to their slaves. They want to be able to be Americans, right? And be free from the British, and be people who are proud of their liberties, and yet part of that means being able to hold other people in bondage. So, independence, liberty, democracy for whites only, not to extend to their African and African-American slaves. And so we've seen the kind of the South in the Revolution and how it evolved in that period too, and how slavery, protections for slavery were kind of written into the federal Constitution in 1787. That's the story we've seen so far. Now, up until this point, let's see if I can find the map somewhere. Here's the map, okay. Let me just come back to what I was going to say. All right. So now we're going to see the South expand. This is the period when the South kind of becomes the South as we recognize it. When all of the lower South, stretching across, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, including Florida, Georgia, of course, all the way into East Texas, becomes this plantation region. And so, big focus here, we're going to look at the spread of the plantation system across the lower South, the spread of slavery, and kind of a deeper entrenchment of slavery in Southern society and the Southern economy, and some of the kind of the implications of this, why this was important. It was very, very important for the history of this nation, the history of this region, including the region that we live in now. Okay, Cotton Revolution. Really the modern South, as it evolved in the 19th century, kind of owes its identity to cotton. And in particular, you can see that here. This is a really, really big cotton growing region, isn't it? This is the only place I know where a football team is named the Cotton Pickers. Okay? Very interesting stuff. Okay. Cotton, the main staple crop. Cotton Revolution in the South. It's in the market revolution in the North, turned toward industrialization in the Northeast, kind of commercial farming in the old Midwest, right? Now we're going to see the Cotton Revolution in the South. The South becomes committed to plantation agriculture all throughout the region, not just on the coastline. Cotton Revolution. Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. Here is an example of a technological innovation that has a big, significant, huge impact on history. I'm not one of these guys that thinks technology is, the driver of history in any really significant way. I think there are a lot of other really very important factors beyond technology that, that drive history. But here is an example where technology makes a big difference with the invention of the cotton gin. Everybody knows, this is one of those things that sticks in our heads, Eli Whitney. Maybe it's his name, right? Interesting name. I don't know. It always sticks in our heads. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793 or so. Now, Whitney was a Yankee. He wasn't even a native Southerner. I guess we just weren't smart enough to invent this thing. We knew we needed one. We didn't know how to do it. He was a Yankee. He was from Connecticut. He'd gone to Yale, the Yankeest of Yankee universities. But he was, he was in Yale. He didn't have a job like a lot of people coming out of college these days. What am I going to do? Gets an offer somehow from the widow of Nathaniel Greene. Now, who remembers who Nathaniel Greene was? The general who ran away, yes, very effectively. The leader of the Southern Campaign. Well, thank you, Nathaniel Greene, for being such a great general and saving us from the British. Here, take this great plantation on the Savannah River. And so he does. He has all this property on the Savannah River in the south. And he dies. The widow's still alive. She needs a tutor for the grandchildren. And she gets somehow Eli Whitney to come down and tutor on her plantation. And while he's there, he decides, what the heck, tutoring doesn't pay very well. I'll invent the cotton gin. And so he dies. Now, what does a cotton gin do?
It takes the seeds out of cotton.
Wait a second. Someone up here's supposed.
It takes the seeds out of cotton.
Takes the seeds out. How many of you have picked up a cotton ball? All right. It's real seedy, right? You got these little fibers, and they're kind of soft. Not as soft as you think they're going to be, but they're kind of soft. And there's all these seeds in there. All right. To separate the seeds from the fiber is called ginning cotton. The gin is to separate the seeds from the fiber. Now you can do that by hand, all right? And if you do it by hand, it's going to take you a long time to separate the seeds from the fiber. You can't do that profitably. Well, it depends actually. Let me step back here. Because there's two kinds of cotton. Two kinds of cotton. Write this down. Two kinds of cotton. One of them is called long staple cotton. Long staple. Also called sea island. Sea island, S-E-A, like islands in the sea, right? Sea island cotton. Long staple cotton can be, has long fibers and very soft fibers. Right? Long, soft fibers, long staple cotton. Very high quality cotton. Not very many seeds, just a few seeds in long staple cotton. So, if you are a cotton planter and you're growing long staple cotton, it's such good quality stuff, and so few seeds that you can get some slaves to gin it for you by hand. You spend all day separating fiber from seeds by hand, and you can still make money from it because the price is high and seeds are few. The problem with sea island cotton is, as its name suggests, sea island cotton, it can only be grown in a very small growing area along the coast. In the lower south, South Carolina and Georgia, the Sea Islands. Very, very small growing area. There's another kind of cotton called short staple cotton. Long staple and short staple. It's also called upland, U-P-L-A-N-D, upland cotton. As the name suggests, it has short fibers, not as good of quality as long staple. Not quite soft, but still okay. And lots of seeds. So the price isn't quite as good because the quality's not as good. There's a lot more seeds, so you pay a slave. Don't pay a slave, of course. You get a slave to gin that cotton by hand, and they gin all day long, and they've got a nice 1 pound pile of clean upland short staple cotton at the end of the day. Not profitable. The good thing about upland cotton is it has a very large growing area. You can grow it all across the lower south. And so Southerners are thinking, man, if we only had a machine that could gin this cotton, separate out these seeds for us very efficiently, we could grow upland cotton profitably, we'd have a new staple crop, we could make lots of money. And that's what Eli Whitney does. So they offer all these bounties or awards If somebody invents an effective cotton gin, a mechanical gin, we'll pay him lots of money. And Eli Whitney does it. Actually, he doesn't really make hardly any money off his invention, as it turns out. People steal his ideas. Plagiarists, right? They steal his ideas. I think he had some issues with the copyright or something. I don't know what it's called, a patent, right? But he does invent the machine. Southerners actually improve on it. Good old Southern mechanics. They improve on it. And before you know it, he's got a machine that can gin cotton, upland cotton, or short staple cotton, profitably. And you've got a new cash crop. What is the impact? I'm going to spend some time talking about the many, many ways that short staple cotton and cotton gin revolutionized the South. First of all, the planter class extends its reach. Now, can't you see this as a short answer? Name 3 ways that cotton had an impact on the South, one environmental, one economic, etc., etc. The planter class extends its reach. Now here's where I wanted to pull up the map for a minute ago. So kind of listen just for a second. The period that we've kind of looked at in the South, the 17th century and the 18th century, the South, the plantation region, where they grow a lot of commercial crops and have a lot of slaves, is right here. It's right along the coast. Because that's where they can get their goods to market most cheaply. So this is the plantation region. Most of the South is occupied by Indians, and parts of it is occupied by yeoman farmers. Small, white family farmers who kind of, they don't have access to easy access to the markets because they don't live in places where they can get goods to market profitably, so they just grow stuff for their own consumption. They live in this area. This is all occupied by Indians. As a result, though, of the invention of the cotton gin, we see the plantation region with this planter class of wealthy, planters who don't work, who have lots of slaves, extending across the southern interior. One thing it does is it drives out yeoman farmers. Drives out yeoman farmers. Say that you are as a family farmer living here in upcountry South Carolina, growing a little corn, maybe a little wheat, with your neighbors, your wife makes butter and cheese and stuff. And, you're doing all right. You're pretty prosperous, but you don't have a lot of commercial ties with the stuff you make. You're just a good, kind of prosperous yeoman farming family in the 1790s. And then suddenly, somebody invents cotton gin. Your land, the value of your land, skyrockets. Okay? Because now that land can be used to grow cotton, which is a very, very, very profitable state crop. And somebody's going to buy that land from you. They're going to pay you pretty good money for it. You're going to take it because you've never seen that kind of cash before. And they're going to bring in slaves. And they're going to start using all this land here for growing cotton. And so the yeoman farm class is either going to become wealthy planters, which very few of them do, or they're going to move out to the edges of the South, beyond the cotton growing region, which many of them do, into North Carolina, into this part of Tennessee. So wherever the cotton revolution comes, where short staple cotton can be grown, the planter class comes in, pushes out the small farmers. And we see a concentration of wealth and power as a result. We have a yeoman society made up of primarily small farmers. What's the distribution of wealth? Think about the pattern of wealth distribution in a society like that. What do you think? People that have more valuable crop have more wealth, but most people are growing mostly the same thing, right? In the yeoman society, there's not a lot of commercial agriculture. You've got some people that have more than others, right? You still have rich and poor, but mostly it's pretty broad, pretty equal distribution of wealth. Most people don't have huge plantations because they don't have the labor to work it, and if they did, they would be able to get their crop to market anyway. So you have a society where there's an equal distribution of wealth. Now the planter class comes in, and you see a concentration of wealth. Concentration of wealth. Remember, that's one of the defining characteristics of a plantation system. Wealth is concentrated. Big house, lots of land, lots of slaves. People who don't work, they sit beneath magnolia trees, sitting there. What is it? I can't hear. I said something.
Mint julep?
They're mint juleps. Yes, they're mint juleps. And entertaining young gentlemen who come following. All right. So this is this concentration of wealth you see in the Old South. About 4%. Talk about concentration. About 4% of the households own about 50% or more of the wealth. That's a pretty good concentration. Half the wealth, or slightly more than half, owned by a tiny, tiny fraction of the population. Just as being broadly distributed in terms of land, resources, and wealth, you get a concentration of wealth. Some people having a lot more than they need, and the rest of them kind of splitting up the rest. Concentration of wealth. And a concentration of power. Concentration of power. When the planter class moves into this area, they take control of politics. And what are they interested in using power for? If you're a wealthy slave-holding planter, what do you want to get power for? Why do you care? What do you think? You're shrugging. Who knows, right? You don't really want power. You just want to make more money, right? Jesse.
Well, with money and power comes the ability to manipulate government politics. So any laws that you want that are in your favor, you can go ahead and use whatever influence.
Fight those Yankee tariffs, right? We can fight those Yankee tariffs. Keep those cotton markets open. Keep cotton prices lower. We can raise and sell more cotton. Don't have to pay so much a high price for the goods that our people consume. That's one thing you can do. If some people in the country might be interested in abolishing slavery or curbing slave imports or whatever, you can fight that politically. In other words, the planter class, what they want to do is protect their interest. And what is their interest? Keeping slavery safe for themselves, maintain their system. So they want to acquire power, national power to do that. This is the age. I love to write this down. It reminds me of something out of Lord of the Rings or something, right? The age of men, the age of the elves. This is the age of the planter. The age of the planter and planter class. This tiny fraction of wealthy white Southerners basically comes to control national politics. And they're able to bend the nation to their will up until about 1860 or so, when everything falls apart for them. This is the age of the planter. You can see the cotton belt right here. And down through the heart of Georgia, central Alabama. This is the richest region right here, the Mississippi Delta. Very, very rich lands that have been covered over by swamps for millennia. The richest soil in the country, capable of producing cotton beyond anybody's wildest imagination. Very wealthy people here. And on into East Texas, and of course now on into Southern Texas. Oops, into East Texas. Still like that? In Mississippi Delta? No, I don't really know. I don't really know. I mean, it's still a very rural agricultural region. I don't know if they're still producing lots of cotton. There was a time in the 20th century, mid-20th century, when Southerners started saying, we're kind of burnt out on cotton, and we need to do something else, and they start diversifying finally. I've been a long, long time to agriculture. And then there's this kind of turn back to cotton, I think later in the 20th century. So I'm not sure what they're doing in the Delta. But it's still a very rural, agrarian, some would say a very backward place, although I wouldn't say that. Because they might be from Mississippi. Cotton becomes king. King Cotton. The interesting thing about cotton is, you guys have had economics classes, you'll find this interesting, right? As the supply increases, right, what happens to the price of goods?
It drops.
It's supposed to go down, isn't it? Right? It's supposed to go down. More supply, price goes down, people buy more stuff. It's not necessarily the case with cotton. Now, there is kind of boom and bust, prices spike and then they dip again. This is a very volatile market, but this is transforming capitalist society and stuff. But, for the most part, cotton production increases and so do prices. They either increase or they remain strong throughout this whole period, all the way through the Civil War. Production increases and so do prices. Production doesn't just increase. I put steadily up here. That's probably, as some of you like to write in your papers, an under-exaggeration. Okay? Nobody thought that was funny. Okay. We need to work on the under-exaggeration thing and make sure that doesn't show up on your papers, all right? That's kind of an oxymoron. Okay. Production increases steadily. Okay. Production increases, we would say, it doubles every 10 years. There's a word for that. I think it's exponentially, but I don't know. Rita says yes, all right? Pretty much every 10 years, the cotton production doubles. So in 1800, there's like 73,000 bales, right? By 1820, which is actually 20 years later, there's like 330,000 bales of cotton being produced. And then 20 years later, it quadruples again.